But who was born 1940 or earlier? Okay, some of you out there, a few of you. Oh, some bold hands. I like that. Thank you. I won't name my names, Bob, but I'm just saying there's some out there. Okay. What I want to say is we are so thankful to have you here. I think often in churches we don't have a place like Harvest that's incredibly multi-generational. And for someone raising young kids, you're important. That you're here is very important. And so I wanted to say that in this family we have that, and that's just so cool to me. But this movie, being 77 years old, it shows it sometimes. And we look at this movie. This movie actually was the second movie ever created by a young animator by the name of Walt Disney. Okay? Now, who could tell me what the first Disney movie ever made was? Snow White. That's right. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, that was the first one. In 1937, I won't get another show of hands, but that's 80 years ago. And so what we're talking about here, when we look at these movies, is really just an understanding of what it means, what life was like in that time. And Walt Disney had somewhat of a Christian background, and so we see some of that through there. But the story of Pinocchio was actually originally written in the 19th century by an Italian by the name of Carlo Collodi. That was his pen name, but that's what he went by. And The Adventures of Pinocchio was an amazing story about this wooden puppet that if he could become a real boy if he were brave, truthful, and unselfish. Those are the three characteristics: brave, truthful, and unselfish. And this story, this idea, has that impact around the world. And I've did some studying and come to learn that this book, The Adventures of Pinocchio, is the second most translated book of all time. Now, who could tell me the first most translated book of all time? The Bible. Okay, you made me nervous for a second there, okay? Good job. Good job. So, second only to the Bible in terms of translations. And that's an amazing thought to me because there's something obviously inherently it carries through cultures and time about this, about what's going on there. Now, one of the really good things on this journey for young Pinocchio is that he's not going to be alone on this journey. Right? We have his trusty assistant, Jiminy Cricket, that's going to go alongside him. And as we see in the clip, Jiminy gives this heart-to-heart talk to Pinocchio. He says, okay, sit down, Sonny, or I forget how he says it, but it's something like that. And he says they're going to give a heart-to-talk. And what's the first thing that Pinocchio talks to Jiminy Cricket about? Do you remember? Right and wrong, temptations. Okay, and then we get our catchy song about temptations and doing right from wrong and following the right way. And Jiminy ends up sounding a whole lot like the Apostle Paul, if you've read that, right? I want to do the right. How do I know the right? How do I make sure that the right things aren't the wrong things and the wrong things aren't the right things? Of course, Pinocchio's listening in his, I picture, because he's off to school, he's this, little 4-year-old, 5-year-old. I've got one myself, so I know what that's like, right? He smiles away and says, okay, yeah, I get it. And then, Jiminy says, do you really understand? He says, and no, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't have a clue. Shakes his head away there. And I think in our lives, we can see some of that same pattern, right? We'll have this sort of false understanding when it comes to God and comes to temptation and comes to right and wrong. We think we get it. I'm 38, and so I feel like in life I kind of get it now. I have a house and a job and kids, and so I kind of get it. And so we get this false understanding, and then we'll have moments of just total confusion. And that's what happens with Pinocchio. But you know what? What he says next is my favorite line in the whole movie. It's a little hard to catch in the clip, but you know what he says? He says, I don't have a clue, but he says, but I'm going to do right. He says, I don't know, but I'm going to do right. And then Jiminy Cricket says, attaboy, Pinocchio, and I'm going to help you. And so I want to talk this morning about really looking at that in our own lives, that that we may not fully understand, fully grasp, but we're going to choose to do right. We're going to fully lean into that. And I don't think I really understood this until I had kids. And so Diane's analogy about water this morning kind of, really impacted me and spoke to me, because we had this situation with Drew probably 6 months ago. And I'm not sure if I should do this, but I'm going to try it anyways. But what he would do is he would drink some water. Okay, so here's what he'd do. Drink some water. And then I'll show you what he would do next. He'd do one of those. Right? He's 3.5. I'm like, okay, buddy, right? You did that, didn't you? You okay? Don't do that. But here's the problem. His 2-year-old sister is beside him, and what do you think Leah thinks about that? It's hilarious, right? And if you've heard Leah laugh, you could hear it down the street. She thinks everything is hilarious, and she laughs away at that. And so what does Drew see? He looks at that and goes, this is awesome. This is the right decision to do. But then, of course, what did Jenny and I do to him? No, Drewby, nobody, you can't do that. That's not okay. And what look does he give us? Total confusion, right? He's like, but Leah thinks it's hilarious, and you tell me to make Leah laugh all the time, so why are you punishing me? So what we'll do, we take away to the cup, we say, okay, we got to take this away, and say the right thing to do here, Drew, is to not do that. So we take it away, and then we think he understands. Okay, do you understand? You can't spray your cup up like you're a professional wrestler. You just can't do that with your water. Yes, totally, Dad. I told Mom. I totally understand. I get it. 10 seconds later, what happens? Waterworks. Big fountain everywhere. Leah's laughing. He's smiling. And then what? Bang, we punish him again. But what ultimately happens here? He starts to learn right. He starts to learn what he should be doing. And thankfully, probably today, since I showed him, he'll do it again today. But he's laughing. But what happens is in the last 3 months, he hasn't done that. Yay, right? He hasn't sprayed water all over. And that's what's happening here is that he's learning to do right. And that's what Pinocchio does, and that's ultimately what we want in our own lives. And the passage we're going to study this morning is from Psalm chapter 15. And it's a psalm of King David. And it very much follows this pattern in David's own life. David writes this psalm when he's 38. So I can absolutely relate to this. Okay, he's a 38-year-old man, and he's like, I got this, God. I know how this works. I know how you operate. And so we have to get a little bit of context on the psalm that he writes. It's on page 378 of the Church Bible if you have it. But we really need to get the historical context to really know this false understanding he has. And so when this psalm is written is about the time David's been a king, he's a young king, and he's now conquered the city of Jerusalem. That was his first sort of big conquest. The Jebusites were there, and he takes them out, and he's about to rebuild and build up the city in the image that he wants it to be built in. And so 2 Samuel chapter 7 starts this way. It says, after the king was settled in his palace, and the Lord had given him rest from all his enemies around him, he said to Nathan the prophet, here I am, living in a house of cedar, while the ark of God remains in a tent. Nathan replied to the king, whatever you have in mind, go ahead and do it, for the Lord is with you. Okay? So David clearly says, hey, you know what? God's been good to me. I've been made king at his order. Whatever I'm thinking about doing, I can do it. So we've got this great city. It's mountainous. There's this high place. I want to build a temple up there because it's sitting in a tent, and I've got this great palace. I want to build this temple, and then I'm going to take the Ark of the Covenant out of its tent. I'm going to place this in the middle of this temple. And why this is so incredibly significant is because what the Ark of the Covenant represents. Inside the Ark of the Covenant is the 10 Commandments. Okay, and the Ark in the tabernacle when they're in the desert, it represents the presence of the very God. and they would go to the tabernacle to meet with God, to really get to know God, and to truly have a relationship with Him. And so David's saying, this is what the temple is all about. This is what it's going to represent. This is what I want to be doing. And so he fully, believes that's the case. And so, he just goes to bed. That's fine. Nathan goes to bed as well. And in the middle of the night, God comes to Nathan and says, David's not the one to build the temple. And so Nathan's like, oh, okay, I'll tell him. I'll let him know. And so Nathan goes and tells David, after David has, total understanding about this. Goes and tells him, and David ultimately says, what? I don't get it. Like, this is what God wants. This totally makes sense. I'm totally confused about this. Totally confused. I have no idea what's going on. And that's really where we pick up our passage this morning. And so this is what it says. Let me read it for you. It says, Lord, who may dwell in your sacred tent? Who may live on your holy mountain? The one whose walk is blameless, who does what is righteous, who speaks the truth from their heart, whose tongue utters no slander, and who does no wrong to a neighbor, and casts no slur on others, who despises a vile person, but honors those who fear the Lord, who keeps an oath even when it hurts, and does not change their mind, who lends money to the poor without interest, who does not accept a bribe against the innocent. Whoever does these things will never be shaken. It's a great passage, a very important passage. But you see in this, how does David start it out? Total confusion, right? He says, Lord, who may dwell in your sacred tent? Who may live on your holy mountain? And I think this really brings us to our first point. And this is something that we need to own in our own lives. And that is that we need to be brave, truthful, and unselfish with God. Much like Pinocchio, to become a real boy, he needs these three things: brave, truthful, unselfish. We need to be these things with God. And David, I believe, in this psalm, starts off by modeling this for us. Because he believes that he truly understands God, understands how God operates, and really believes this temple building is what God wants. And when that doesn't happen, David is truthful. He's honest with God. He says, who gets to dwell in your temple? Like, who gets to have a relationship with you? And what he's really getting at is who gets to know you? Who gets to know what you're really like, what you're really about? And he's struggling because he's saying, I was sure that you were going to say yes to this. Right? I was sure, God, that this was going to happen. But it doesn't happen, and now I feel like I don't know you. I don't have a relationship with you. And so what am I going to do about that? And I think so many of us can relate to that in our own lives. Right? We think we know God, right? Maybe, we get to a place in our life where we think we understand how he operates. And then he does something that completely floors us, totally rattles us. Maybe it's, a family member that we think he'll heal. He doesn't heal. Maybe it's, a dream job that we thought he really had for us, and we lose that job because of the economy or something. Maybe we do all the right things, we make all the right decisions, and he doesn't sort of reward us in the way that we think he should reward us. And it absolutely rattles us. And I really believe that there's sort of a choice we can make there. And this comes back to our brave, truthful, and unselfish areas. Because really what we could do when we were presented that choice and we're rattled, we could do the unselfish thing. We could say, you know what, God? You didn't operate on my terms. You didn't do this the way, and I'm out. I'm done. Right? We've probably had those moments in our lives. We know people who have done that. Whether it's family or friends that have just walked away from their faith because they had an experience that just completely rattled them and shook them to their core. They had a crisis in their faith. right? We've had those moments for them. And we can do that. We can do the selfish thing rather than the unselfish thing, and we can say, okay, you know what? You're not the way I want you to be. I'm done. Right? We also can do, and sadly we see this, the untruthful thing. Right? We can say, God, I'm mad at you. I'm bitter with you. I'm not talking to you. But we just keep going to church. Keep mailing it in. Keep saying, hey, you know what? I love God, singing songs, raising our hand, doing whatever we do. And inside, we're festering with bitterness. We've got this bitterness in our heart that we haven't allowed ourselves to be real truthful and honest with God about. Okay, and that's our choice. And the third choice, I believe, is what we absolutely need to lean into. The third one is this, that we ultimately, deep down say, God, I don't have a clue what you're doing, but I'm going to trust you. But I'm going to do what's right. And that's bravery. That's being brave. That's hard to do, but that's what we need to do. We need to acknowledge that. God, I don't know what you're doing. I want to be real honest and transparent with you. I had a moment like this. A few years ago, when Jenny's aunt in her young age, she passed away from cancer. I was incredibly frustrated with God. I didn't understand why on earth he did what he was doing. And I had a moment where I said, you know what, God, I'm walking. You didn't do what we prayed and prayed and prayed that you would heal her, and you didn't. And I had to confess that to him and say, you know what, God, I'm not going to be selfish in that. I'm going to make this about you. But then I also had a moment where I wasn't truthful, where I just said, hey, you know what? I'm going to keep going to church and pretending like everything's good and I'm happy when inside I'm so mad with God because she passed away. But I'm going to fake it because if I have a Christ in my faith, I'm going to affect friends and family members and people in our church family. They're going to see that and they're going to have a Christ in faith. And so I'm not being honest there. And so ultimately I had to do the brave thing. I had to say, you know what, God, I don't know why you're doing this. I don't understand, but I'm going to trust you, and I'm going to do what's right. I'm going to seek to follow you and do the right thing in that, and that's always very, very hard to do. But that's what David does in this passage, and that's why it's so important to see what David does next here. He really says to God that he wants to have a relationship, but David's really confused. He doesn't know how that's going to happen. But he doesn't get in this sort of stuck and bitter-hearted place. He actually says, I'm going to choose what's right. I'm going to look at this in my life and I'm going to do the right thing. And I think that's this place in our life we need to get to next. Right? When we say, God, I don't know what you're doing or why you're doing it, but I'm going to trust you. I'm going to do what's right. We have to go right back to the bedrock of our faith. Why we chose to believe, and for some of us that's a short time. For some of us, a lot longer, right? But we have to go back to these places where we say, "Okay, God, what does it mean to follow you?" And I believe in the rest of Psalm, David gives us a great reminder of some of these bedrock beliefs. And those right things, I believe, really resolve around a second principle, which is, I believe, to be brave, to be truthful, and to be unselfish with other people, with those we come in contact with. And I think, I really believe in this one, that when we can be those things, we can be, brave, we can be truthful and unselfish with others, that God will grow in us a real knowledge of him. Because David starts off by saying, someone that knows God here, he says, the one whose walk is blameless, who does what is righteous, who speaks the truth from their heart. And really what he's saying here is listen, just be truthful. Be truthful with others. Speak truth from your heart. That's what he goes on to say there. He says, speaks the truth from their heart. And I really believe in that, that we can be really guilty of that one because we kind of want to justify not speaking the truth from our heart, right? Well, they're gonna upset them, or they're not gonna like me. And I really believe that's when true bravery comes in. To speak truth to people, that's why David highlights this. To speak truth to people when it's difficult, that takes a real bravery. But here's a challenge in that. Often we'll speak the truth, and we do that to kind of get the person to act in the way we want them to act. Right? We say, well, this is way off, in your life, and so you need to do it this way. And then we'll get to a place where they don't act in the way that we want them to act. And David really highlights that in the next one. He says, if they don't act in the way that you want them to act, here's what you do. Don't go around slandering them. That's what it says there. Don't treat them poorly. Don't talk to them in a cruel way. Just be humble enough to acknowledge it may have a false understanding of what's going on, right? So he's saying, when this happens, when you speak the truth and they don't react, don't slander them. Don't cast a slur, he says. Just humbly say, maybe I don't fully understand here. And that's so crucial in our dealing with others. And then David talks in the next part about people who have, for so long in their lives, he calls them a vile person in the NIV translation, that for all their lives, they've just ignored that small voice. They absolutely totally give in to temptation. Those of you that have watched the Pinocchio movie, that there's a character in there, I don't know if you remember, his name was Lampwick. This character who totally ignores anything right and drags Pinocchio into all the wrong things. And Diane talked about this, and I want to specifically talk to you kids about this. Okay, there could be a place in the schools you're at where the cool kid, right, is the kind of rebellious, ignore the rules kind of kid, and David says here, don't look up to those people as your model. Don't try to be like them. Look up to people that know God and have a relationship with Him. Look up to brave, truthful, unselfish people. And that's the heart of what David's getting at there when he talks about honoring someone and ignoring the vile person, right? And that's so much about our relationship with others. And then he really goes on, and I believe he gives three great examples here of what that looks like in our own lives and our interaction with others. And this is what it says. He says, listen, when you promise you're going to do something, you need to do it. Because that's what being truthful looks like. Right? That's what he's talking about when he talks about oaths, right? Be truthful. And he says, and when you give money to someone who doesn't have a lot, money to the poor, don't charge them extra because that's what being unselfish looks like. If you're selfish, you want that for yourself. But truly unselfishness looks differently. And then he says, when someone tempts you with something that's wrong, he's talking about a bribe against the innocent, just say no. Because that's what true bravery looks like. Stand up against that. Right? And what I just love so much about what David has done here and what the example that he's given us is that he's really sort of answered his own question. Right? When he poses at the beginning about what someone that follows after God, what's someone that really knows God, that really has a relationship with God, what do they look like? He answers it, and he says, much like in the movie Pinocchio, they're brave, they're truthful, they're unselfish, not just in the way that they interact with others, but in the way they interact with God. That defines their life. And he says here, whoever does these things will not be shaken. And so what David and I want to encourage us, and I want to leave you with this, is in our own lives, we need to take a long, hard look at that. Say, in my interaction with other people, in the way that I live my life with God, am I truly doing brave things? Am I being truthful, even when it hurts, like the passage says? And am I truly acting in unselfish ways? And can I do that with God and with other people? And I believe, just as this passage says, that if we will do that, if we will live that way, that we will know God and know Him in deeper and more full, not a false understanding, but a true understanding. And we'll allow other people to know, and we'll have a relation with Him. Let me pray for us. God, we just thank you so much for your word. It's powerful. It's life-changing. And God, I pray that you would just be with each one of us, God, even this week, that you would help us to be these things. Help us to look to what your word is asking us, to be brave, to be truthful, to be unselfish. Those are our bedrock principles of what it means to know you. And we want to be that, God, in our relationship with you, and we also want to be that in the lives of people that we come in contact with. That they will see, like your word says, a light, that we're reflecting the light of you, the light of Christ, in our world because we're showing these attributes. So God, I just pray that you just be with each one of us. Just bless us this morning. And we just pray these things in your name. Amen.